I always loved hiking alone. The solitude, the quiet, the feeling of being completely cut off from the world. It made me feel alive. That's why I decided to take a solo trip deep into the wilderness of Montana, following an old, mostly forgotten trail that I had read about in an old hiking forum. The route wasn't popular, and that's exactly what I wanted. No tourists, no families, no noise, just me and the wild. It was supposed to be a 4-day trek through thick forests, over ridges and past a few alpine lakes. The kind of trip that forces you to rely on yourself. The first day was perfect. The trail was overgrown but still visible, winding through dense pine forests with the scent of damp earth and rotting leaves filling the air. I made good progress, covering nearly 10 miles before setting up camp near a small stream. The only sounds were the wind through the trees and the occasional rustling of unseen animals in the underbrush. By the second day, the trail started to fade. What had once been a clear path turned into a faint suggestion of one. I had to check my GPS often, and even then, I found myself backtracking. The terrain was getting rougher, too. Steep inclines, loose rocks, thick underbrush that tore at my clothes. But that was part of the challenge. I pushed on. That night, things felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I hadn't seen another person in 2 days, but something about the silence felt different, heavier. I reminded myself that I was deep in the wild, where animals roamed freely. But even that didn't sit right. It wasn't the usual sounds of the forest.
No bardes, no insects, no distant owls.
Just nothing. I barely slept, every small sound sending a jolt of adrenaline through my body. But morning came, and with it a renewed sense of confidence. I packed up and continued. The third day was brutal. The terrain had shifted into something far more rugged than I had expected. Sharp inclines, sudden drop-offs, and thick, clawing underbrush slowed me to a crawl. My GPS was spotty, and my map didn't seem to match the landscape. I was losing track of where I was, but I told myself it was just the difficulty of the hike getting to me. Then, I found the first sign that something was seriously wrong. I came across a campsite, not an old one either. The fire pit was still intact, with a few logs arranged around it. A tarp had been stretched between 2 trees, though it was sagging and torn. A backpack leaned against a fallen log, covered in dirt and leaves. I called out, but there was no answer. Approaching the camp, I felt a deep unease settle in my chest. Everything looked abandoned, but not in the usual way. It wasn't just left behind, it was wrong. The backpack was open, its contents half pulled out. Clothes were scattered in the dirt. A cooking pot sat upside down next to the fire pit, and beside it was something that made my stomach twist. A single boot, lying on its side, the laces still tied. I checked the backpack, hoping for some kind of identification. Inside, I found a few water bottles, a first aid kit, and a journal. I flipped through it, but the last entry made my blood run cold. Something is following me. I don't know what it is. I keep hearing it at night, getting closer. The date on the entry was from 3 weeks ago. I dropped the journal and stood up, heart pounding. I scanned the woods, half expecting someone, or something, to be watching me. But there was nothing, just trees, silent, unmoving, suffocating. I should have turned back then. I should have retraced my steps and hiked out as fast as I could. But I was too deep in. I had already covered so much ground, and my exit point was ahead, not behind me. I convinced myself that whoever left the camp must have just gotten lost. Maybe they made it out, maybe they didn't. But that wasn't my problem. I was wrong. That night, the silence returned. No wind, no insects, no life. Just the weight of the dark pressing in from all sides. Then the sound came. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't the wind. It was footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling my camp. I stayed perfectly still, barely breathing. My knife was in my hand, but I knew it wouldn't do much if someone, or something, was out there. The footsteps stopped for a long time. Minutes stretched into eternity. Then, just as I thought it might have been my imagination, a twig snapped right outside my tent. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I just sat there, gripping my knife so tightly my hand ached. The footsteps started again, moving away this time. I waited until I couldn't hear them anymore, then forced myself to lie down, eyes wide open, waiting for morning. At first light, I packed my gear as fast as I could and started hiking. I didn't care about my original route anymore. I just wanted out. I moved fast, barely stopping, forcing my way through the brush, checking over my shoulder every few minutes. Then I saw it. About 50 feet off the trail, half hidden in the trees, was something I'll never forget. A man's jacket torn and hanging from a branch. Below it, the forest floor was disturbed, dirt kicked up like there had been a struggle. And beneath that, a deep, dark hole in the ground, just wide enough for a person to fit inside. I didn't go near it. I didn't check inside. I just turned and ran. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs threatened to give out. I ran until I saw the first sign of civilization. A dirt road, a faded wooden sign pointing toward a ranger station. I stumbled onto the road, breathing so hard I thought my chest would split open. I followed it for what felt like miles until I finally saw the ranger station. I pounded on the door until someone answered. I told them everything. About the camp, the journal, the footsteps, the hole in the ground. They listened, eyes dark with understanding, but they didn't look surprised. "We'll check it out," one of them said. "But you should head home." I never found out what they discovered. I never wanted to. I haven't been hiking alone since. I should have turned back when I had the chance, but I didn't. That thought has lived in my head ever since I got out of those mountains. It started with a simple idea: go hiking alone. I had always been into the outdoors, but I usually hiked with friends. This time, I wanted to push myself. I wanted to see if I could handle the isolation, the challenge, the quiet. So, I planned a weekend hike deep into the mountains, away from the usual trails. I picked a remote route I had read about in an old hiking forum, a path that had seen little foot traffic. It was supposed to be beautiful, untouched, peaceful. The first day went fine. The sun was high, the wind was light, and the air was crisp. The trees were thick, towering pines stretching so high they seemed endless. The sound of my boots crunching on dirt and twigs was the only noise aside from the occasional rustling of birds or squirrels. I felt free, alone but in a good way. I followed the route carefully, checking my map and GPS often, making sure I stayed on course. By late afternoon, I reached a clearing near a small creek and decided to set up camp. The spot was perfect: flat ground, access to water, and surrounded by enough trees to block the wind. I pitched my tent, built a small fire, and sat back to enjoy the quiet. The sun dipped below the treetops, and the temperature dropped fast. I ate a simple meal, warmed my hands by the fire, then crawled into my sleeping bag. The first night was uneventful. I woke up once to some animal noises in the distance, probably a deer or maybe a raccoon. Nothing unusual. I went back to sleep. The second day, I pushed deeper into the forest. The path became harder to follow. The trees grew denser, and the undergrowth was thick. My GPS kept losing signal, but I wasn't too worried. I had a compass and a physical map. I knew where I was going, or at least I thought I did. By mid-afternoon, I realized the terrain didn't match the map. I should have been nearing another creek, but there was no sign of it. I checked my compass again and adjusted my course slightly. Still, nothing looked familiar. The feeling of being lost crept in, slow but steady. I told myself it was fine, just a small miscalculation. I kept walking. That's when I saw it. A structure. Not a house, not a cabin. Just a structure. A wooden frame, half-built, long abandoned. The wood was gray with age, the beams weathered and cracked. It looked like someone had started building a shelter and then just stopped. Something about it put me on edge. It didn't make sense for anything to be out here. This was supposed to be untouched wilderness. I walked around it, looking for any signs of who built it. Nothing. No tools, no footprints, no signs of life. Just that empty frame standing alone in the forest. I moved on quickly. Something inside me told me not to linger. The deeper I went, the worse it got. The forest started to feel different. The trees seemed closer together, the air heavier. The quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt like something was pressing down on me. Then I found the clothes. A tattered jacket, half buried under leaves. Then a shoe, its sole worn down, laces missing. The more I looked, the more I found. A ripped backpack strap. A torn piece of fabric caught on a branch. Old things weathered by time, but unmistakably human belongings. Panic started creeping in. I told myself maybe these were just lost items from another hiker years ago. Maybe someone had passed through and dropped them. But deep down, I knew that wasn't right. There was too much. Too many things scattered too far apart. Then I found the knife. It was stuck in a tree, buried deep into the wood, rusted and old. The handle was wrapped in what looked like duct tape. Someone had put it there, and whoever it was, they had never come back for it. That's when the fear hit me full force. I wasn't alone out here. I didn't know who had been here before me, or if they were still around. But I knew one thing. I needed to leave. I turned back the way I had come. Or at least I thought I did. The trees all looked the same, the path was gone, and the undergrowth was too thick to see any clear way out. My GPS was useless. My compass spun wildly, making no sense at all. I kept moving, fast, trying to retrace my steps, but nothing looked familiar. Every tree, every rock, every direction looked the same. I walked for hours. The sun started setting, and I still wasn't out. My heart was pounding. My hands shook. Then I heard it. A crunch. Not mine. I froze. Another crunch. Closer. I turned slowly, scanning the trees. Nothing. Then movement. A flicker of something dark between the trees. I didn't wait. I ran. I don't know how far, how long, but I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs ached, until I couldn't run anymore. By the time I stopped, it was almost completely dark. I had no fire, no shelter, nothing. Just my backpack and whatever was left in it. I forced myself to breathe, forced myself to think. I had to keep going, couldn't stop. I walked through the night, no rest, no stopping. The feeling of being watched never left me. Every noise made my heart jump. Every shadow felt like it was hiding something. But I didn't stop. When the sky started turning gray, I saw something through the trees. A road, a real road, not a trail, a paved road. I stumbled toward it, half-dazed, exhausted, dehydrated. When I reached it, I collapsed to my knees. A truck passed by a few minutes later. I must have looked insane, waving my arms like a madman, but the driver stopped. An older guy, gruff but kind, asked me what the hell I was doing out there. I couldn't even explain. I just told him I got lost. He gave me water, drove me back to the nearest town. I never told him about the structure, or the clothes, or the knife. I don't go hiking alone anymore. I started my hike early in the morning, just as the sky was turning pale blue. The air was crisp, carrying that fresh, earthy smell of damp soil and pine needles. It had rained the night before, and the trail was slick with mud, making every step feel uncertain. But I had been planning this solo trip for weeks. mapping out the perfect route through the dense forest, deep into the mountains where few hikers ventured. It was supposed to be just me and the wilderness for 3 days. The first few miles were peaceful. Birds chattered in the trees, and the occasional squirrel darted across the path. My boots sank slightly into the damp ground, but I kept a steady pace. I had checked the weather forecast, clear skies for the next few days, no unexpected storms. Everything was going to be fine. By midday, I had covered a good distance. I took a break by a small stream, refilled my bottle, and ate a granola bar. I hadn't seen a single soul since I left the trailhead, which was exactly what I wanted. The isolation felt freeing. I could hear my own breath, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of some unseen bird. The sun had begun to dip lower when I reached my planned campsite. It was a small clearing beside a lake, surrounded by tall pines. The water was still, reflecting the deepening colors of the sky. I set up my tent, gathered some wood for a fire, and cooked a simple meal. As darkness settled in, I felt content, staring at the flames and listening to the distant hoot of an owl. Then something felt off. It was subtle at first, a shift in the air, a quiet tension in the trees. The night sounds, crickets, frogs, the occasional rustling, seemed to fade, leaving an eerie silence. My skin prickled. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks. I was alone out here after all. But then I heard it, a sound in the distance, a branch snapping, not just the wind, not some animal moving through the underbrush. It was deliberate, like a footstep. I froze, every muscle in my body tightening. I turned my head slowly, staring into the darkness beyond the fire's glow. The trees stood still, shadowy and imposing. I listened, holding my breath. Nothing. It was probably just an animal, a deer maybe, or a raccoon. I forced myself to relax. I wasn't going to let my imagination ruin the trip. Still, I decided to let the fire burn a little longer before crawling into my tent. I barely slept. Every small noise kept me on edge. The wind moving through the branches, the occasional creak of a tree shifting. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I had done solo hikes before and nothing had ever happened. But something about this place, this silence, felt different. The next morning, I woke up groggy but determined to shake off the paranoia. I packed up, shouldered my bag, and pressed on. The trail became steeper, winding higher into the mountains. My legs burned with effort, but I welcomed the distraction. By noon, I had reached a ridge with a stunning view of the valley below. I took a deep breath, feeling a little foolish about my nerves the night before. Then, I noticed something strange. Near the edge of the ridge, the ground was disturbed. The dirt had been scuffed up like something or someone had been there recently. At first, I thought it was just natural erosion, maybe from the rain. But then I saw them, footprints, human footprints. They were faint but unmistakable, and they weren't mine. A chill ran down my spine. I hadn't seen another person since I started my hike. There was no sign of a campsite nearby, no indication that anyone else had passed through. And yet, the tracks were there, leading toward the trees before vanishing into the undergrowth. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe another hiker had come through earlier. But why did they leave the trail? Why hadn't I seen any other signs of them? I pushed forward, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling creeping up my back. As the day wore on, the sense of being watched never fully went away. Every now and then, I would stop, pretending to adjust my pack and listen. But the forest remained silent, too silent. That night, I chose a spot further off the trail, beneath a rocky overhang that would offer some cover. I set up my tent quickly, ate a small meal, and kept my fire small. I didn't want to draw attention to myself, but the feeling of unease only grew stronger. And then, sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. I didn't know why at first. The fire had burned down to embers, casting faint shadows against the rock wall. The night was silent, too silent. I lay there listening, barely breathing. Then something moved outside my tent. It was slow, deliberate, a faint crunch of dirt underfoot. My heart pounded so hard I thought whoever or whatever was out there would hear it. I reached for my knife, gripping it tight, my palms sweaty. The footsteps stopped, just outside. Couldn't breathe. Then the fabric of my tent shifted. Not the wind. Something touched it. Ran a hand, no fingers, along the side. A slow, deliberate drag of fingertips. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I stayed still, clutching my knife, barely blinking. And then, nothing. Minutes passed. Then an hour. I don't know how long I stayed like that, frozen in fear. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I must have drifted into a light, fitful sleep. At first light, I tore out of the tent, scanning the area. Nothing.
No footprints.
No sign that anything had been there. But I knew what I heard, what I felt. I packed up and hiked faster than I ever had in my life. I didn't stop. I didn't eat. I barely drank. I just moved, pushing forward, needing to get back to civilization. By late afternoon, I reached the trailhead. My car was still there, waiting like an anchor to safety. I threw my pack in, locked the doors, and sat there for a long moment, my hands gripping the wheel. I don't know what was out there. I don't know if it was a person or something else. But I know one thing for sure. I will never hike alone again. I had always loved hiking alone. Something about the quiet, the isolation, and the feeling of being truly away from everything made me feel at peace. I wasn't reckless. I always brought supplies, a map, extra food, and emergency gear. But I didn't rely on technology. Phones lost signal. Batteries died. I trusted my instincts, my training, and my careful planning. This trip was supposed to be like all the others. I had planned a 3-day solo trek through a remote part of a national forest, a place where the trails were barely marked, and the wildlife outnumbered the few hikers who ventured that deep. The park rangers warned that the trails could be difficult, but I liked that. I wanted to push myself. I wanted solitude. I wanted that deep silence where the only sounds were the wind in the trees and my own breathing. The first day went smoothly. I followed a narrow path up into the mountains, weaving through thick pines and stepping over fallen logs. I felt strong. The air smelled fresh, clean. I made camp near a small creek, setting up my tent and building a fire as the sun dipped behind the trees. I ate, read a little by flashlight, and fell asleep to the sound of water trickling over rocks. On the second day, things changed and I woke early and packed up, eager to cover more ground. The plan was to loop around a ridge and descend into a valley where I'd camp for the night. But an hour into my hike, I noticed something strange. The trail looked different. I had studied the map carefully before setting out, and I was sure I was on the right path, but the landmarks weren't lining up. The trees felt denser, the undergrowth thicker. I checked my compass. It pointed in the direction I was heading, which should have been correct. I pressed on, telling myself I must have just misjudged the terrain. But the feeling didn't go away. It only got worse. By midday, the trail had vanished completely. I stood in the middle of the woods, surrounded by trees, with no sign of the path I had been following. My stomach tightened. I had been hiking for years, and I had never lost a trail this badly. I pulled out my map again, checking my bearings. The sun was still high in the sky, so I knew my general direction. I wasn't panicking. Not yet. I decided to backtrack, retracing my steps to where I had last seen a clear path. I walked for nearly an hour, scanning the ground, looking for any sign of my footprints. But there was nothing. The forest floor was thick with leaves and pine needles, and it was as if I had never walked there at all. That was when I noticed something even more unsettling. The sounds of the forest had changed. Hiking alone, you get used to the rhythm of nature, the rustling of branches, the occasional snap of a twig underfoot, the chirping of birds. But now the woods were too quiet. No birds, no wind, no distant sound of running water, just silence. My own breathing sounded too loud. Then I heard it dot a branch breaking. Not behind me, not in front of me, but off to the side, somewhere deeper in the trees. It wasn't a small sound, it was deliberate, sharp. I froze, my heart hammering. Deer? Maybe. A bear? Possibly. But something about it felt wrong. I had two choices. Move toward it to see what it was or ignore it and keep moving. I chose the latter. I turned and started walking, faster than before, my eyes scanning for anything familiar. I wasn't lost. Couldn't be. I just needed to find my way back. Another sound. Closer this time. A footstep. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. The sound of a single footstep in the forest is distinct from an animal moving through underbrush. It wasn't a deer. It wasn't a bear. It was something walking. I turned in a slow circle, my eyes darting between the trees. Nothing, just thick woods stretching in every direction. I forced myself to breathe, to think. If it was another hiker, they would have called out by now. If it was an animal, it wouldn't be following me like this. I didn't know what it was, and that scared me more than anything. I picked up the pace. I wasn't running. Running in an unfamiliar forest was a bad idea. But I moved quickly, trying to put distance between myself and whatever was out there. I kept checking over my shoulder, expecting to see something lurking behind me, but there was nothing. Just trees, just silence. Then I saw it, a piece of fabric hanging from a low branch. It was dark, maybe navy blue or black. I stepped closer. It was torn, the edges frayed, like it had been caught on something. I reached out and touched it, and the material was damp. I pulled my hand away. It hadn't rained in days. I looked around again, my skin crawling. Had someone else been here? Was someone still here? I didn't stay to find out. I turned and kept walking, forcing myself not to break into a sprint. The trees looked the same, the ground uneven, but I moved with purpose, relying on pure instinct. I needed to find the trail. I needed to get out. Another sound. Not a footstep this time. A whistle. It was faint, almost distant, but I knew it was real. A single, slow note held for a second too long. Then silence. I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I just kept moving. I walked for what felt like hours, my legs aching, my throat dry. My brain was screaming at me that something was following, watching, waiting. And then, just as the sun began to dip, I saw it. A trail marker. A small wooden post, barely visible through the undergrowth, with an arrow carved into it. Relief flooded through me. I wasn't out yet, but I was close. I followed the trail, my body screaming for rest, my mind fighting off the urge to look back one last time. I knew if I did, I might see something I didn't want to see. By nightfall, I reached the trailhead. My car was there, just as I had left it. I got inside, locked the doors, and sat there, breathing hard. My hands were shaking as I turned the key in the ignition. I never went back to that forest. I never reported what happened, because what could I say? That I got lost? That I heard things? That something was out there? I don't know what was in those woods, but I do know this. I wasn't alone. I had been planning this solo hiking trip for weeks. The trail deep in the Pacific Northwest was remote, rugged, and exactly what I needed. I wanted to disconnect, clear my head, and push myself.
No distractions.
Just me and the wilderness. The morning I started, the weather was perfect. Cool crisp air and a sky so blue it looked fake. I parked my truck at the trailhead, double-checked my gear, and started my hike. My pack was heavy but manageable, filled with the essentials: food, water, a tent, and emergency supplies. I felt good, strong, ready. The trail began in dense forest, the ground damp from recent rain. Pine needles softened my steps, and the only sounds were the occasional rustling of leaves and the distant call of birds. I had planned for a 4-day loop, with each night at a designated campsite. The first day was uneventful. I covered a solid 12 miles before setting up camp near a small river. I cooked a simple meal, stretched out by the fire, and let the quiet of the forest settle in. Nothing felt off. I was exactly where I wanted to be. The second day was tougher. The trail got steeper, and the temperature dropped as I gained elevation. By late afternoon, my legs burned, and my shoulders ached from my pack. I found a clearing on a ridge with a view of the valley below. It was breathtaking, worth the struggle. I set up camp, ate, and crawled into my tent just as the wind picked up. Somewhere in the middle of the night, I woke up, not to a sound, but to a feeling. Something wasn't right. I listened. The wind had stopped. The forest, normally alive with noise, was dead silent. That kind of silence isn't normal. I unzipped my tent just enough to peek out. The trees stood still, their branches heavy with darkness. I scanned the area with my flashlight, my breath hanging in the cold air. Nothing moved. No animals, no wind, nothing. Just the eerie quiet. I told myself I was overthinking. Maybe the stillness was just natural. Maybe I was just spooked from being alone. I zipped up my tent and forced myself to sleep. The next morning, I felt stupid for letting my imagination run wild. I packed up and pushed forward, trying to shake the unease from the night before. The third day was brutal. The trail became barely a trail at all, more like a suggestion of a path winding through dense undergrowth. At one point, I had to navigate around fallen trees, which threw me off course. I checked my map. I wasn't far from my planned route, but I was definitely off trail. I kept moving, figuring I'd reconnect with the main path soon. But the deeper I went, the worse it got. The ground turned uneven, covered in thick roots and loose rocks. My pace slowed to a crawl. Then I noticed something that stopped me cold.
Bootprints.
Fresh ones. I wasn't alone out here. That shouldn't have been a big deal. People hike these woods. But these prints weren't on the trail. They were deep in the middle of nowhere, far from any campsite or known route. And they weren't heading toward the trail. They were heading deeper into the wilderness. My gut told me to turn back, to find my way to the main trail, even if it took longer. But I was stubborn. I had my GPS, my map. I knew my general direction. I kept moving. An hour later, I found something worse than footprints. A torn-up backpack, half buried under leaves and dirt. It looked old, like it had been out here for months. The fabric was shredded, but not by animals. The cuts were too clean. I bent down, my heart pounding, and unzipped the main compartment. Inside, I found a water bottle, some energy bars, and a notebook. The pages were warped from moisture, but I could still make out some of the writing. The last entry sent a chill through me. Asterisk, I think someone is following me. I hear them at night, getting closer. Asterisk, I shut the notebook and stood up fast, scanning the trees. My skin crawled. I needed to go. Now, I turned in the direction I came from, trying to retrace my steps. But the landscape looked different. Everything looked the same. Trees, rocks, shadows. I walked faster. Then I heard it. A branch snapping. Not from an animal. From something heavy. Deliberate. I stopped. Held my breath. Silence. Then another step. Closer. I didn't wait. I ran. My heavy pack slowed me down, but I didn't dare stop to adjust it. My only goal was to get back to the trail, to get somewhere safe. Branches tore at my arms as I barreled through the undergrowth. My breath came in ragged gasps. My boots slipped on loose dirt. I didn't know if I was being chased or if my own fear was chasing me, but I wasn't going to stop to find out. Then, through the trees, I saw it. The trail. I burst onto it and ran another 100 feet before stopping. I turned, heart hammering, scanning the trees. Nothing. No movement.
No sounds.
I waited, my hands shaking, my breath unsteady. After a few minutes, I forced myself to move. I walked fast, almost jogging, putting as much distance between me and that part of the forest as possible. I hiked for hours, not stopping until I reached the next designated campsite. It was empty. I didn't care. I set up my tent, but I didn't sleep. I sat by the fire, my back against a tree, my knife in my hand, listening, waiting. By morning, I packed up and hiked the last stretch back to my truck without stopping. When I reached the parking lot, I threw my pack in the back, climbed into the driver's seat, and locked the doors. Only then did I let out a long, shuddering breath. I never reported the backpack. I should have, but I didn't. I didn't want to explain why I was off trail. I didn't want to go back out there. I still hike, but never alone. Never in that part of the woods, and never without looking over my shoulder. I don't know exactly where to start because it still feels like a blur, but I'll do my best to put everything in order. It was supposed to be a solo hike, just me, the woods, and the quiet. That's how I liked it. No distractions, no noise, just the steady rhythm of my boots against the dirt trail. I had done hikes like this plenty of times before, so I didn't think twice when I picked this particular route. It was a little more remote than my usual ones, but that was part of the appeal. The trailhead was empty when I arrived early in the morning. I parked my car, checked my pack, made sure I had everything: extra food, water, a first aid kit, a flashlight, my knife. I had even brought a small emergency tent just in case. My phone had no signal, but I had already expected that. I made sure to download an offline map before heading out. I locked my car and started walking. The trail was beautiful at first. It cut through thick forest, tall pines on either side, the morning sun filtering through the branches. Birds chirped, and I could hear the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. The air was crisp, cool, just perfect for hiking. I followed the trail markers carefully, making sure I was on the right path. After a couple of hours, I reached a fork in the trail. According to my map, both paths eventually looped back to the main route, but one was shorter and steeper while the other wound deeper into the forest before curving back. I chose the longer one. I wasn't in a rush and I wanted to enjoy the hike. That's when things started to feel off. At first, it was subtle. The trees were thicker here, taller, their trunks gnarled and twisted in ways that didn't seem natural. The sounds of the forest changed, too. The birds were quieter, the rustling less frequent. It was like something had shifted. The deeper I went, the stronger the feeling got. I tried to shake it off. It was just my imagination. I kept walking, but I started noticing little things. The trail, which had been well marked, started to fade. The dirt path became less defined, covered with leaves and debris. The markers, those little colored strips nailed to trees, were gone. I checked my map, but it was hard to tell if I had gone off track. I turned back the way I came, thinking I must have missed a marker, but after 10 minutes, I was still nowhere near where I had started. That's when I heard it, a branch snapping, not a small twig, but something bigger, something heavy. I stopped, listening. The forest was dead silent now. No wind, no birds, just the sound of my own breathing. I scanned the trees, my heart pounding. Could have been a deer, could have been a bear, but something about it didn't feel right. I adjusted my pack, gripping the straps tightly, and kept moving. I picked up the pace, hoping I'd find the trail again soon. But the further I went, the worse it got. The trees all looked the same, and I couldn't tell which direction I had come from. I checked my map again, but it was useless. I had wandered too far, and the GPS wasn't pinpointing my exact location. Then I saw it, a cabin. It was old, barely standing, hidden between the trees like it had been swallowed by the forest. The wood was dark with age, the roof sagging in the middle. No windows, just a single door slightly open. My first instinct was to ignore it and keep moving, but I was lost, and my options were running out. Maybe someone had left supplies inside, or maybe there was something I could use to get my bearings. I approached slowly, my footsteps careful. The air around the cabin felt heavy, like the whole forest was holding its breath. I reached the door and nudged it open. The inside was worse than I expected. Dust covered everything. A small wooden table, a single chair, and a cot against the far wall. The smell of damp wood and decay filled the air, but it was what was on the floor that made my stomach drop. Footprints, fresh ones, leading from the door to the cot, but not back out. I backed out immediately, my pulse racing. Someone had been in there. Maybe they still were. I turned, ready to get as far away as possible, when I heard it. A deep, slow inhale. Not from me, not from an animal, from inside the cabin. I ran. I don't know how long I ran for. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. The forest blurred past me until I tripped over something, probably a root, and hit the ground hard. My hands scraped against rocks and dirt, but I barely felt it. I lay there, panting, listening. Nothing. No footsteps. No breathing. Nothing chasing me. I forced myself to stand, every muscle in my body screaming in protest. I had no idea where I was. I checked my map again, my hands shaking, and by some miracle, I saw a familiar landmark. A small river that ran parallel to the main trail. If I could find it, I could find my way back. I moved as fast as I could, scanning the trees, every shadow making my skin crawl. It felt like hours before I finally heard the water. When I reached it, I almost collapsed with relief. I followed the river downstream, my only thought getting back to my car. By the time I reached the trailhead, the sun was low in the sky. My car was the only one there, just as I had left it. I fumbled for my keys, practically throwing myself inside before locking the doors. My hands were still shaking when I started the engine. I didn't look back as I drove away. I don't know who or what was in that cabin. I don't want to know. All I know is that I'm never hiking alone again. The plan was simple, an overnight solo hike in the mountains. I had done it before many times and I knew these trails well. The weather was clear, my pack was loaded with everything I needed, and I was ready to disconnect from the world for a while. Nothing about this trip felt any different from the others I had taken. The first few hours were peaceful. The forest was alive with the sounds of birds and the distant rush of a river. The air smelled fresh, a mix of pine and damp earth. I kept a steady pace, making my way up the winding trail, stopping now and then to take in the view. I planned to reach a secluded clearing before sunset, where I would set up camp for the night. The area was about 10 miles from the trailhead, far enough that I wouldn't run into many people, but not so remote that it felt dangerous. I had checked the map and knew the terrain well. I wasn't worried. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, I found my campsite. It was a small flat spot near a creek, surrounded by towering trees. I set up my tent, started a small fire, and cooked a simple meal. The solitude was exactly what I needed. When night fell, the woods changed. The chirping birds were replaced by the sounds of insects and the occasional rustling in the underbrush. Normal sounds, nothing unusual. I sat by the fire, staring into the flames, feeling the weight of the day settle into my bones. Then I heard it, a sound in the distance, distant but distinct. It was rhythmic, deliberate, like footsteps. At first, I dismissed it as an animal, deer maybe, but as the minutes passed, the sound didn't go away. It wasn't coming closer, but it wasn't fading either. It was just there on the edge of my hearing. I grabbed my flashlight and scanned the trees. Nothing, just darkness and the flickering shadows cast by my fire. I shook off the unease creeping up my spine. It was just the wilderness playing tricks on me. I forced myself to relax, climbed into my tent, and zipped it shut. The fire was still burning low outside, casting a soft glow through the fabric. I closed my eyes, listening to the quiet hum of the night. Then I woke up. I don't know what time it was, but the fire had burned out. The air inside my tent was cold. Something had woken me up, but I didn't know what. I stayed still, listening. The sound was closer now. Footsteps, slow, measured, coming from the direction of the creek. My heart pounded. I reached for my knife, gripping the handle tightly. My flashlight was beside me, but I didn't dare turn it on. The footsteps stopped, then started again, circling my campsite. I held my breath, listening. Then silence. Minutes passed, maybe an hour. I wasn't sure. I stayed frozen, every muscle tensed, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. Eventually, exhaustion won. I must have drifted off because the next thing I knew, the sky was lightening with the first hints of dawn. I unzipped my tent carefully, peering out. Everything looked normal. The forest was quiet, still waking up with the morning. My firewood was untouched. My pack was where I left it, but the dirt around my campsite told a different story. Footprints, human footprints. They circled my tent. I packed up fast, not bothering with breakfast. My hands shook as I tore down my tent, shoving everything into my bag as quickly as I could. I wanted to get out of there. Now, I moved fast, almost running down the trail. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone following me, but there was no one. The woods were empty. The 10 miles back to my car felt endless. Every snapping twig made my stomach lurch. I didn't stop until I reached the trailhead, breathless and sweating. When I got to my car, I locked the doors and sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel. I never found out who or what had been out there with me, but I know one thing. I wasn't alone that night, and I haven't gone camping alone since.